The Xylos collective, hive-minded beings of crystalline structure and collective consciousness, were the first to call us the unpredictables. The Kuthar Dominion rigidly organized, tentacled creatures, who valued order above all, labeled us the chaos factor. Neither term was meant as a compliment. Commander Alexei Volkov stood before the holographic display in the Strategic Command Center aboard the Starship Endeavour, his weathered face illuminated by the swirling blue projections. At 57, his dark hair streaked with silver at the temples, Volkov had witnessed humanity's first contact with the Xylos, negotiated peace with the Ethereal Council, and now found himself on the precipice of a war that could determine humanity's place in the galaxy. The latest reports from the Outer Rim colonies, Volkov said, his voice low and measured, show a pattern of Xylos expansion that directly contradicts their stated intentions. Dr. Amara Okonkwo, the ship's xenopsychologist, adjusted her glasses as she studied the data streams. Their collective consciousness operates on principles we're still struggling to comprehend. But their fear of individuality is well documented. And that's precisely why they fear us, Volkov replied, turning to face the assembled officers. Our individuality, our capacity for independent thought is something they cannot assimilate, cannot predict, cannot control. The holographic display shifted, showing a map of the contested region between human and Xylos space. Red dots indicated recent Xylos incursions, each one closer to human settlements than the last. Commander, Lieutenant Raj Patel interjected, his young face tense with concern. The Xylos fleet movements suggest they're preparing for something significant. Their warships are massing near the Theta Eridani system. Volkov nodded grimly, which puts our colony on New Eden directly in their path. A heavy silence fell over the command center. New Eden was home to over 12,000 humans, including families, scientists, and a small military contingent. It was also strategically located near several vital resources that both species coveted. What's the status of our reinforcements? Captain Isabella Rodriguez asked, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Still 3 weeks out, Volkov replied. The Kuthar are monitoring the situation but have made no commitments to assist. Of course they haven't, Rodriguez muttered. They'd probably welcome a Xylos victory against us. Volkov's eyes narrowed. The Kuthar fear unpredictability, Captain, and nothing is more unpredictable than humans at war. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. Which brings us to the real reason I've gathered you all here. The holographic display changed again, this time showing a series of cryptic symbols and equations that none of the officers recognized. These are fragments of Xylos communications we've intercepted over the past month, Volkov explained. Our cryptographers have been working around the clock to decipher them. What they've discovered is troubling. Dr. Okonkwo stepped forward, her expression grave. The Xylos aren't just expanding their territory. They're specifically targeting human colonies for reasons that have nothing to do with resources or strategic positioning. What reasons? Rodriguez asked, her skepticism evident. They're afraid of something about us? Okonkwo continued, something they refer to in their communications as the cognitive divergence, or the mental singularity. Volkov zoomed in on a particular set of symbols. According to our best translations, the Xylos believe humanity represents a threat to all structured consciousness in the galaxy. They think our minds operate on a fundamentally different level than any other species. How? Patel asked, leaning forward in his seat. That's what we don't know, Volkov admitted. But the Xylos seem convinced that left unchecked, humanity could, well, their language is metaphorical, but they speak of reality distortion and conceptual contagion. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. The notion that humans possessed some unknown mental capability that frightened the Xylos was both unsettling and, in a strange way, empowering. Is there any evidence to support these claims? Rodriguez asked, ever the pragmatist. Okonkwo nodded slowly. There have been anomalies. Incidents reported from various human outposts that defy conventional explanation. Collective nightmares shared by entire colonies. Spontaneous technological breakthroughs that scientists can't fully explain. Moments of what appears to be precognition or telepathic connection between humans in extreme situations, Volkov added. And most recently there's this. He played a recording from New Eden's security logs. The footage showed a group of children playing in a park when suddenly, they all stopped and looked up at the sky in unison. For exactly 47 seconds they remained perfectly still, their faces filled with an expression that was simultaneously wonder and terror. Then, just as suddenly, they resumed their play as if nothing had happened. The Xylos ship wasn't visible to our sensors at that time, Volkov explained, but we've since confirmed it was passing through the system. Those children somehow sensed its presence. Coincidence, Rodriguez said, though her voice lacked conviction. Perhaps, Volkov conceded. But there have been similar incidents reported on 12 different human worlds in the past month alone. Always when Xylos vessels were nearby, always involving humans who had no way of knowing they were there. He paused, studying the faces of his officers. The Ethereal Council has sent us a warning. They won't intervene directly, but they've advised us that the Xylos are preparing to do something unprecedented. What kind of something? Patel asked. Volkov's expression darkened. They're planning to deploy a weapon, one specifically designed to target human consciousness. The room fell silent again, the implications of this revelation sinking in. A weapon that could attack the mind itself, what could that possibly entail? How would such a weapon even work? Rodriguez asked, her skepticism now replaced with genuine concern. We don't know, Okonkwo admitted. But the Ethereals hinted that it might be related to this Xylos ability to form and manipulate collective consciousness fields. They seem to believe that human minds are somehow resistant to this ability and they want to change that. Volkov turned to the young lieutenant. Tetel, I want you to coordinate with our intelligence division. Pull every report of unusual mental phenomena from our colonies. Cross-reference with Xylos shipums. Look for patterns. Yes, Commander, Patel replied, already making notes on his datapad. Captain Rodriguez, Volkov continued, prepare the Endeavor for departure. We're leaving for New Eden immediately. Sir, that would put us directly in the path of the Xylos fleet, she cautioned. Exactly, Volkov said with a grim smile. Sometimes the best defense is a conspicuous presence. As the officers dispersed to carry out their orders, Volkov remained alone in the command center, studying the cryptic Xylos symbols. There was something he wasn't telling them, a piece of information so disturbing that he wasn't sure how to process it himself. 2 nights ago, he had experienced one of those collective nightmares Okonkwo had mentioned. He had dreamt of a vast crystalline entity consuming worlds, not through physical destruction but by absorbing the consciousness of their inhabitants into its collective mind. And in the dream, he had felt the entity's fear not of humanity's weapons or technology but of something far more fundamental. He had felt its fear of human imagination, the ability to conceive of possibilities that didn't exist, to envision futures that contradicted present realities, to hold contradictory beliefs simultaneously, to hope against all evidence. These uniquely human traits, which had always been celebrated as hallmarks of creativity and innovation, might in fact be what made humanity so terrifying to the Xylos. The capacity to think outside any established pattern, to resist assimilation not through force but through sheer cognitive flexibility. Volkov shuddered, remembering the climax of his nightmare. The crystalline entity turning its attention toward Earth, not with aggression but with what felt like desperation, as if humanity represented a threat to its very existence, a cognitive virus that could unravel the ordered universe it sought to create. Commander? Sinkonkwo's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Are you all right? Volkov turned to find her watching him with concern. Just processing the implications, he said, forcing a smile. It's a lot to take in. I understand, she replied, though her expression suggested she suspected there was more he wasn't sharing. I've been reviewing the historical records of first contact with the Xylos. There were incidents that were dismissed at the time as communication errors or cultural misunderstandings. What kind of incidents? Moments where individual Xylos units appeared to malfunction when exposed to human creativity. Art, music, even mathematics that approached problems from unconventional angles. In several cases, these units had to be isolated and reset to restore them to the collective. Volkov felt a chill run down his spine. And no one thought this was significant? It was noted, but the implications weren't understood at the time, Okonkwo explained. The Xylos attributed it to incompatibility between their systems and our primitive technology. But what if it was something else? What if human creativity literally disrupts their consciousness? The ship's intercom system crackled to life. Commander Volkov, report to the bridge immediately. Volkov and Okonkwo exchanged a worried glance before hurrying to the bridge. When they arrived, they found Patel hunched over a sensor display, his face pale. "What is it, Lieutenant?" Volkov asked. "Sir, you need to see this," Patel said, gesturing to the screen. "We've detected a massive energy signature emanating from the direction of New Eden." Volkov studied the readings, his military training immediately recognizing what he was seeing. "That's a fleet. A big one." "More than that, sir," Patel replied, zooming in on the energy signature. "Look at the configuration." As the image sharpened, Volkov felt his blood run cold. The Xylos fleet wasn't just advancing on New Eden, it was arranged in a pattern he had never seen before. A formation that seemed designed not for attack but for something else entirely. "They're surrounding the colony," Rodriguez said from her station at the helm, "cutting off all escape routes." "They're not just surrounding it," Volkov realized, his voice barely a whisper. "They're enveloping it." The full horror of the situation suddenly became clear. The Xylos weren't planning to attack New Eden with conventional weapons. They were preparing to deploy their consciousness weapon against the entire human population. "How long until they complete the encirclement?" Volkov asked, his voice now firm and commanding. "At their current speed, approximately 6 hours," Patel replied. "Which gives us just enough time to get there," Volkov said, turning to Rodriguez. "Set a course for New Eden. Maximum warp." "Sir, with all due respect, that would be suicide," Rodriguez protested. "We're one ship against an entire fleet." "Then we'll have to be very convincing," Volkov replied, his eyes fixed on the holographic display. "Because if we don't stop them, we may lose more than just one colony." As the Endeavour changed course and accelerated toward New Eden, Volkov couldn't shake the feeling that they were sailing into something far more significant than a mere military confrontation. The Xylos had been watching humanity for decades, studying our minds, our behaviors, our unique cognitive abilities. And now they were making their move. What the Xylos didn't know, what even Volkov himself was only beginning to understand, was that in targeting the human mind they might have unleashed something far more dangerous than they could possibly imagine. Something that was about to awaken not just in the colonists on New Eden but in every human across the galaxy. Something that would change the nature of consciousness itself. The Endeavour dropped out of warp on the edge of the Theta Eridani system, its view screen filled with the terrifying spectacle of the Xylos fleet surrounding New Eden. Hundreds of crystalline vessels, ranging from small scouts to massive command ships, formed a nearly perfect sphere around the human colony, their hulls glowing with an eerie blue light. "My God," Rodriguez whispered from the helm. "There must be at least 300 ships out there." "More like 500, Patel corrected, his hands flying across his console as he analyzed sensor readings. "And they're powering up some kind of energy field that's completely enveloping the colony." Volkov stared at the viewscreen, his mind racing. "What's the status of the colony's communications?" "Completely jammed, sir," Patel replied. "We can't get through and they can't get out." "Can we break through the jamming?" "Not without alerting the entire fleet to our presence," Rodriguez cautioned. Volkov considered their options. A direct confrontation would be suicide. A stealth approach might work, but what could they do once they reached the colony? The Xylos were clearly preparing to deploy their consciousness weapon, and they had the Endeavour outgunned by an overwhelming margin. "Commander," Okonkwo said, her voice urgent, "I've been analyzing the energy field they're generating. It's not just a weapon, it's something more complex." "What do you mean?" "It's resonating at frequencies that correspond to known neural patterns," she explained, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "They're not just trying to attack human consciousness, they're trying to map it, understand it, and possibly assimilate it." Volkov felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. The Xylos weren't planning to destroy humanity. They were planning to absorb it, to incorporate human consciousness into their collective. And in doing so, they would eliminate the very thing that made humans unique: our individuality. "Can we stop them?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "Not with conventional weapons," Okonkwo replied. "This isn't a physical battle, it's a cognitive one, and we're vastly outnumbered in that regard." Volkov studied the holographic display, his mind working furiously. The Xylos had the advantage of numbers, of organization, of unified purpose. Humanity was fragmented, individualistic, often at odds with itself, but perhaps those very weaknesses could become strengths in this particular confrontation. Patel, Volkov said, turning to the young lieutenant, I need you to do something unconventional. Sir? I need you to modify our communications array to broadcast on the same frequencies as the Xylos consciousness field. Volkov explained. But instead of blocking it, I want you to amplify it. Specifically, the aspects related to human creativity and imagination. Patel's eyes widened in understanding. You want to use their own weapon against them? Precisely, Volkov replied. If the Xylos are vulnerable to human cognitive patterns, then let's give them an overdose. As Patel worked frantically to modify the communications array, Volkov turned to Okonkwo. We need you to prepare a message, not in words, but in concepts. Something that represents the full spectrum of human creativity and imagination. Okonkwo nodded, her expression determined. I'll need to access the ship's cultural archives. Art, music, literature, mathematics, everything that showcases human thought at its most innovative and unpredictable. Take whatever you need, Volkov said, then turned to Rodriguez. Once we begin broadcasting, the Xylos will know we're here. I need you to be ready to execute some evasive maneuvers that they won't expect. Rodriguez smiled grimly. You mean maneuvers that defy conventional physics and logic? Exactly, Volkov replied. The kind of thinking that only humans would come up with. As his officers carried out their orders, Volkov felt a mixture of fear and excitement. They were about to engage in a form of warfare no human had ever contemplated. A battle not of ships or weapons, but of minds and concepts. The Xylos had chosen the battlefield, but humanity might just have the home field advantage when it came to cognitive warfare. Meanwhile, on the surface of New Eden, the colony's inhabitants were experiencing something extraordinary. The Xylos consciousness field had enveloped the planet, but rather than attacking or assimilating human minds as expected, it was triggering something unprecedented. In the colony's school, children who had been playing together suddenly found their thoughts merging, their individual consciousnesses blending into a collective awareness that retained their unique perspectives. They could sense each other's thoughts, feelings, and memories, not as a jumble of confusion but as a harmonious symphony of individual voices. In the research laboratory, scientists working on unrelated projects suddenly found themselves sharing insights and breakthroughs as if they had been working together all along. Complex mathematical equations solved themselves in their shared consciousness, technological innovations emerged fully formed, and scientific theories that had eluded humanity for centuries suddenly became clear. In the military barracks, soldiers who had trained together found their tactical awareness expanding to encompass not just their immediate surroundings but the entire colony, their individual experiences and skills combining into a comprehensive strategic understanding. And in every home, workplace, and public space across the colony, ordinary people were discovering a new form of connection, one that preserved their individuality while allowing them to share thoughts and experiences directly, without the need for spoken or written language. The Xylos had intended to assimilate human consciousness into their collective, but something unexpected was happening instead. Human consciousness was adapting to the connection, finding a middle ground between individuality and collectivism that the Xylos had never encountered before. The result was a cognitive singularity, a new form of consciousness that combined the best of both approaches, the creativity and innovation of individual human minds with the connectivity and shared awareness of a collective. And it was spreading. Back aboard the Endeavour, Patel had finished modifying the communications array. Ready to broadcast, Commander, he reported. Begin transmission, Volkov ordered. A wave of human concepts, art, music, literature, mathematics, philosophy, and more, flooded the Xylos consciousness field. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the Xylos fleet, crystalline vessels began to malfunction, their systems disrupted by the influx of human cognitive patterns. Some ships simply went dead in space, their collective consciousness overwhelmed by concepts they couldn't process. Others began to exhibit erratic behavior, their movements becoming unpredictable and chaotic. But most disturbing of all, some Xylos units began to change. Their crystalline structures started to shift and reconfigure, adopting new patterns that incorporated elements of human thought and creativity. These transformed Xylos were neither purely individual nor purely collective. They were something new, something that shouldn't have been possible according to everything the Xylos believed about consciousness. "What's happening?" Rodriguez asked, watching in disbelief as the Xylos fleet descended into chaos. "It's working," Okonkwo said, her voice filled with awe. "Human cognitive patterns are disrupting their collective consciousness, but not in the way we expected. They're not just causing confusion, they're creating something new." As if on cue, a communication came through from one of the transformed Xylos vessels. The message wasn't in words but in concepts. A complex mixture of Xylos and human thought patterns that was difficult to understand but unmistakable in its meaning. "They're asking for help," Patel said, his eyes wide with disbelief. "The transformed Xylos. They're caught between two forms of consciousness, and they don't know how to reconcile them." Vonkov stared at the viewscreen, his mind reeling from the implications. The Xylos had feared human consciousness because they believed it would destroy their collective identity. But what if it could actually enhance it? What if the combination of human individuality and Xylos collectivism could create something greater than either alone? "Commander," Okonkwo said, her voice urgent, "I'm detecting something else. Something coming from New Eden." She brought up a new display, showing a pattern of neural activity that was unlike anything they had ever seen before. It was complex, dynamic, and somehow familiar. "What am I looking at?" Volkov asked. "I think it's the colony," Okonkwo replied, her voice filled with wonder. "The inhabitants have formed some kind of collective consciousness, but it's different from the Xylos version. It retains individuality while allowing for direct communication and shared experiences." Volkov felt a chill run down his spine. The Xylos had intended to assimilate human consciousness, but instead they had accidentally triggered its evolution. The colonists on New Eden had achieved what humans had only dreamed of, a form of communication that transcended language, a connection that preserved individuality while enabling collective thought, and it was spreading beyond the colony. "I'm detecting similar patterns emerging in other human settlements," Patel reported, his voice filled with disbelief. "Not just in this system, but across the galaxy. It's as if what happened on New Eden created some kind of cognitive resonance that's triggering similar awakenings elsewhere." Volkov stared at the holographic display, his mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. Humanity was undergoing a transformation not just on New Eden but across the galaxy, and the Xylos had inadvertently triggered it. "We need to contact Earth Command," Volkov said, his voice firm. "They need to know what's happening." "Already tried, sir," Patel replied. "All communications are being jammed, not just by the Xylos but by something else, something human." As if in response to his words, a new communication came through, not from the Xylos or from Earth Command, but from the newly awakened human collective on New Eden. The message was complex and multifaceted, conveyed not in words but in pure concepts that bypassed language entirely. It spoke of a new form of consciousness that was emerging among humans, one that combined individuality with collective awareness, creativity with shared purpose, innovation with cooperation. It also spoke of the Xylos, not as enemies to be defeated, but as potential partners in this new form of existence. The collective consciousness on New Eden had somehow accessed the Xylos hive mind, not to conquer it but to understand it, to find a way for both species to coexist and perhaps even thrive together. And most astonishing of all, it offered a warning. There were other forces in the galaxy that would view this new form of human consciousness as a threat, forces far more powerful and dangerous than the Xylos. The Ethereal Council, Okonkwo realized, her eyes wide with dawning horror. This is what they were afraid of. Not just human individuality, but what might happen when it combined with collective consciousness. Volkov felt a chill run down his spine. The Ethereals were ancient beings who had observed galactic history for eons, rarely intervening directly but always watching from the shadows. If they feared this new form of human consciousness, then humanity was facing a threat far greater than the Xylos fleet currently surrounding New Eden. "We need to establish contact with the human collective," Volkov said, his voice firm. "Find out what they know about the Ethereals and what we're up against." "Already working on it, sir," Patel replied, his fingers flying across his console. "But their communication patterns are unlike anything we've encountered. It's like trying to translate a symphony into words." As Patel worked to establish communication with the human collective, the Endeavor's sensors detected a new presence entering the system. Vast, ancient ships that seemed to materialize out of nowhere, their hulls shimmering with an energy that defied conventional physics. "The Ethereals," Rodriguez whispered, her hands tightening on the helm controls. "They're here." Volkov stared at the view screen, his heart pounding. The situation had escalated beyond anything he could have imagined. What had begun as a confrontation between humans and Xylos had now drawn the attention of the most powerful and enigmatic species in the galaxy. And somewhere in the midst of it all, humanity was undergoing a transformation that would change its place in the cosmos forever. The ethereal ships hung in space like ancient gods observing a mortal conflict, their presence so overwhelming that even the chaotic Xylos fleet seemed to pause in response. These were not vessels of war but of observation, their forms shifting and flowing like living constellations. "They're not communicating," Patel reported, his voice tight with tension. "At least not in any way we can detect." "They're observing," Okonkwo realized, her eyes fixed on the view screen. "Studying what's happening to the Xylos, to the humans on New Eden, to us." Volkov's mind raced through the possibilities. The Ethereals had intervened in galactic affairs only a handful of times in recorded history, and always with consequences that reshaped the cosmos. Their appearance here now suggested that they viewed the emergence of this new form of human consciousness as a significant event, one that might require their direct involvement. "Commander," Rodriguez said, her voice urgent, "I'm detecting energy fluctuations from the ethereal ships. They're preparing to do something." "Raise shields," Volkov ordered. "All hands to battle stations." As the Endeavor's crew scrambled to their positions, the communication came through not from the Ethereals but from the human collective on New Eden. The message was clear and urgent. The Ethereals weren't here to attack humanity but to contain what was happening, to prevent the cognitive singularity from spreading beyond New Eden. "They're afraid of it," Okonkwo realized, her voice filled with dawning horror. "Not because it's dangerous but because it changes the balance of power in the galaxy." Volkov understood immediately. The Ethereals had maintained their position as the most advanced species in the galaxy, not through technology or military might but through cognitive superiority. If humans were developing a new form of consciousness that surpassed their own, it would threaten their status as the galactic apex species. "They're going to try to isolate New Eden," Volkov said, his mind working furiously. "Create some kind of quarantine field to prevent the cognitive singularity from spreading." "Can they do that?" Rodriguez asked. "They're the Ethereals," Volkov replied grimly. "They can do pretty much anything they want." As if in confirmation of his words, the ethereal ships began to emit a strange energy field, one that seemed to bend space and time around the New Eden system. The colony and the surrounding Xylos fleet began to shimmer as if being phased out of normal reality. "They're creating a pocket dimension," Okonkwo realized, her eyes wide with disbelief. "A separate reality where they can contain what's happening." "We can't let them do that," Volkov said, his voice firm. "Patel, can we disrupt the field?" "Not with conventional weapons, sir," Patel replied. "But perhaps with the same method we used against the Xylos." Volkov nodded slowly. "You mean broadcasting human cognitive patterns directly at the ethereal ships?" "It might work," Okonkwo cautioned. "Or it might provoke them into taking more drastic measures." "We're already past the point of caution," Volkov decided. "Patel, prepare to broadcast everything we have. Human art, science, philosophy, everything that showcases our unique cognitive approach." As Patel worked to modify their broadcast, the human collective on New Eden sent another message, one that was even more astonishing than the first. They weren't just observing what was happening, they were actively resisting the ethereal quarantine field, using their combined consciousness to push back against the pocket dimension formation. And they were asking for help not to defeat the Ethereals, but to communicate with them, to make them understand that this new form of consciousness wasn't a threat but an evolutionary step that could benefit all species in the galaxy. "The colonists are fighting back," Rodriguez reported, watching in amazement as the quarantine field flickered and destabilized. "I don't know how they're doing it, but they're actually resisting the Ethereals." Volkov felt a surge of pride and awe. Humanity had always been defined by its resilience, its refusal to accept limitations, its relentless drive to overcome obstacles. Now faced with the most powerful species in the galaxy, humans were doing what they did best, refusing to give up, refusing to accept defeat, finding a way to fight back against impossible odds. "Begin broadcast," Volkov ordered. A wave of human concepts flooded toward the ethereal ships, more powerful and focused than the one directed at the Xylos fleet. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The ethereal vessels, which had remained passive and observant until now, suddenly reacted, some physically recoiling from the broadcast, others shifting their configurations in response to the concepts they were receiving. A few even began to mimic human patterns, their forms adopting shapes that incorporated elements of human art and mathematics. "They're responding," Okonkwo said, her voice filled with wonder. "Not just reacting, but actually engaging with our concepts." A communication came through from the ethereals, not in words but in pure concepts that were somehow understandable despite their alien nature. It spoke of fear, fear of change, fear of losing their position as the galaxy's most advanced species, fear of a form of consciousness they couldn't control or predict. It also spoke of curiosity, a grudging acknowledgement that this new form of human consciousness represented something they had never encountered before, something that might offer insights into the nature of reality itself. And most surprisingly, it spoke of loneliness, the burden of being so advanced, so different from other species that true communication was impossible, true understanding unattainable. Volkov felt a sudden empathy for these ancient beings. Humanity had always struggled with its own uniqueness, its sense of isolation in a universe where it often felt like the odd species out. Perhaps the ethereals experienced something similar, but on a cosmic scale. "They're not just powerful," Okonkwo realized, her voice filled with dawning understanding. "They're lonely. They've been at the top for so long that there's no one they can truly communicate with as equals." "Until now," Volkov said, his mind racing with implications. "Until humanity developed this new form of consciousness." As if in response to his thoughts, the human collective on New Eden sent another message, one that wasn't just a communication but an invitation to the ethereals to join them in this new form of existence, to combine their ancient wisdom with human creativity, to find a way to bridge the gap between their species and art, something greater than either alone. The ethereals' response was immediate and unequivocal: refusal. They couldn't risk losing their individuality, their unique perspective, their position as the galaxy's most advanced species, but they also couldn't bring themselves to destroy what was happening on New Eden. Instead, they offered a compromise. They would allow the cognitive singularity to continue, but they would contain its spread to the New Eden system, giving humanity time to understand and control what was happening before it expanded to the rest of the galaxy. "It's a reasonable compromise," Okonkwo said, though her voice conveyed disappointment. "It's not enough," Volkov replied, his mind working furiously. "If humanity is to evolve, it can't be confined to a single star system. We need to find a way to convince the ethereals that this new form of consciousness isn't a threat, but an opportunity." He turned to Patel. "Can we establish a direct communication link with the human collective on New Eden?" "I think so, sir," Patel replied. "But it will require redirecting most of the ship's power to the communications array." "Do it," Volkov ordered. "Rodriguez, take us closer to New Eden. We need to be within the quarantine field to establish the connection." As the Endeavor moved closer to the shimmering boundary of the pocket dimension, Volkov felt a strange sensation, a sense of connection not just with the ship's crew but with something larger, something that encompassed all of humanity. It was faint, barely perceptible, but it was there, the beginning of his own connection to the emerging collective consciousness. "We're approaching the boundary," Rodriguez reported, her hands steady on the helm controls. "The field is destabilizing as we get closer." "Patel, establish the link," Volkov ordered. As the communications array powered up, Volkov felt his consciousness expanding, his thoughts merging with something vast and complex yet somehow familiar. He could sense the minds of the colonists on New Eden not as a jumble of confusion but as a harmonious symphony of individual voices, each retaining its unique character while contributing to a greater whole. And through this connection he understood what needed to be done. "The ethereals aren't afraid of our consciousness," Volkov said, his voice filled with dawning realization. "They're afraid of our potential to evolve beyond them." He turned to Okonkwo. "We need to show them that this new form of consciousness isn't about replacing them but about joining them, about creating a bridge between our species that allows both to evolve." "How?" Okonkwo asked. By demonstrating that human creativity and ethereal wisdom can combine to create something neither species could achieve alone, Volkov explained. We need to show them the benefits of cooperation rather than competition. Through his connection to the human collective, Volkov formulated a new message, not just to the ethereals but to the transformed Xylos as well. It spoke of a galaxy where different species could combine their unique strengths, where individuality and collectivism could coexist, where diversity wasn't a threat but an opportunity for growth and innovation. The response was immediate and surprising. The transformed Xylos, caught between their original collective consciousness and the new patterns they had absorbed from humans, were the first to respond, not with words but with actions. They began to reconfigure their vessels, creating new designs that incorporated elements of both Xylos and human technology, demonstrating in physical form what Volkov had proposed in his message. The ethereals' response was slower, more cautious, but as they observed the Xylos transformation, they began to shift their own configurations, their vessels adopting patterns that incorporated elements of human thought while retaining their essential ethereal nature. They're considering it, Okonkwo said, her voice filled with hope. They're actually considering the possibility of cooperation rather than containment. Volkov felt a surge of optimism. Perhaps humanity's greatest strength wasn't just its individuality or its creativity, but its capacity to build bridges between different perspectives, to find common ground where none seemed to exist, to create unity out of diversity. As if in confirmation of his thoughts, the human collective on New Eden sent another message, one that wasn't just a communication but a revelation. The cognitive singularity wasn't just a new form of consciousness. It was a new form of evolution, one that wasn't limited by physical constraints but could spread through ideas and concepts, transforming not just humans but any species that chose to embrace it. And it offered a choice: remain as they were, limited by their current cognitive patterns, or evolve into something new, something greater, something that transcended the limitations of individual species and embraced the potential of a galactic consciousness. The ethereals' response was immediate and unequivocal: acceptance. They would allow the cognitive singularity to spread beyond New Eden, not just to humans but to any species that chose to embrace it. They would even contribute their own knowledge and experience to help guide its development. The transformed Xylos responded similarly, offering to serve as a bridge between the new human consciousness and the remaining Xylos collective, helping their species understand and perhaps eventually embrace the cognitive evolution. As the pocket dimension dissolved and New Eden returned to normal space, Volkov felt his connection to the human collective strengthening, his own consciousness expanding to encompass new perspectives and insights. He could sense the minds of his crew, the colonists on New Eden, the transformed Xylos, and even the ethereals, not as separate entities, but as parts of a greater whole. And through this connection he understood what humanity had become. Not just another species in the galaxy, but a catalyst for cognitive evolution. A bridge between different forms of consciousness, a force for unity in a diverse cosmos. The cognitive singularity is spreading, Patel reported, his voice filled with wonder. I can feel it, other human colonies awakening to the same consciousness we've established on New Eden. Volkov smiled, feeling a sense of pride and hope for humanity's future. The war with the Xylos had been avoided, but something far more significant had been achieved. A new form of consciousness that promised to transform not just humanity but the entire galaxy. As the Endeavor prepared to return to Earth with news of what had happened, Volkov received one final communication from the human collective. A message of thanks and welcome, an invitation to fully embrace the cognitive evolution that had begun on New Eden. He accepted without hesitation, feeling his consciousness expand to encompass new perspectives and insights, new connections and understandings. He was still Alexei Volkov, still an individual with his own thoughts and memories, but he was also part of something greater, something that transcended individual identity while preserving its uniqueness. The Galactic War Report would record these events as the beginning of humanity's true ascendance, not through military conquest or technological superiority, but through cognitive evolution, through the capacity to bridge differences and create unity out of diversity. And every alien empire would indeed come to fear the human mind. Not because it threatened their existence, but because it challenged their limitations, offered new possibilities for growth and evolution. and demonstrated that the greatest strength in the universe wasn't power or control but the capacity to change, to adapt, to evolve beyond the constraints of individual perspective, and embrace the potential of collective consciousness. The human mind had always been unpredictable, creative, resilient. Now it had become something more, a catalyst for galactic evolution, a bridge between different forms of consciousness, a force that would transform the cosmos in ways no species could have anticipated, and this was only the beginning.